Meaning a prophecy by the mere force of it being believed is transmuted into fact. Isaac Asimov. The pages of the 2026 Old Farmer's Almanac were already dog-eared, stained with coffee rings, and covered in Frank's cramped pencil marks. He received his copy in the mail back in August, the same week NOAA released its official winter outlook. The Almanac, with its cryptic astrological calculations and secret formula, had called for a teeth-chattering season in the Great Lakes, heavy snow, brutal cold, and a white Halloween that would bleed into a frozen, silent April. Frank, a 58-year-old superintendent for Buffalo's Department of Public Works, and he had a trusted almanac for 30 years. Our forefathers didn't have satellites, he'd tell his crew. They had squirrels, woolly bears, and that little yellow book, and they survived. But this year was different. This year, the meteorologists weren't just talking about a storm. They were whispering about the Super El Niño. Out in the vast, warm pool of the equatorial Pacific, ocean temperatures were spiking to levels not seen since 1997. The 2027 Super El Niño was a behemoth, a climatic bully that was rewriting the rules of winter. The model predicted it would push the polar vortex so far north that Buffalo might see a mild December, a blasphemy for the city of snow. Frank's young protege, Maya, a data scientist with a PhD in climatology, slammed a laptop on his desk in early December. "Frank, look at this," she said, pointing at the spaghetti models. "The almanac says cold and snowy. The European model says warm and wet, but the Super El Nino is a wild card. It doesn't play by normal rules. If a jet stream buckles just wrong, that warm, wet Pacific air hits the Arctic air mass sitting over Canada and it stalls right over Lake Erie." Frank grunted. "The book says Farmer's Almanac. The other one is calling for snow, ice, and surprises. That's 3 words, Maya. That's a promise." "Meteorology isn't a promise, Frank. It's a probability." The first 2 weeks of December were eerily quiet. Temperatures in Buffalo hovered in the mid-40s. Rain fell instead of snow. Frank stared at the almanac on his nightstand, feeling a creeping betrayal. Had the old gods finally lost their touch? Then on January 14, 2027, the Super El Nino showed its teeth. It wasn't a cold wave, it was a collision. The massive El Nino pumped a firehouse of subtropical moisture straight up the Mississippi Valley simultaneously. The destabilized polar vortex, pushed off its axis, dropped a hammer of Siberian air straight down through Ontario. They met not over the plains, but directly over western New York. The lake effect machine, Lake Erie, which had refused to freeze due to the mild December, was churning like a hot tub of 40-degree water under a negative 15-degree Arctic ceiling. The temperature differential was apocalyptic. Frank was awakened at 3 a.m. by a sound he had never heard in 30 years. Thunder. Thunder snow. He looked out his window to see a blinding white vertical wall. The almanac had forecasted 18 inches over the season. The first 24 hours of the storm dumped 36 inches on South Buffalo. By day 3, the city was buried under 70 inches. The National Guard was deployed. The airport was closed indefinitely. Maya's models had been right about the mechanism, the El Nino phase shift, but even her supercomputers hadn't predicted the intensity. The lake was too warm. The air was too cold. The physics were monstrous. Frank trudged through the waist-deep drifts to the DPW garage, the frozen almanac sticking out of his coat pocket. He looked at the cover, 2026 winter forecast. It had been right about one thing. It would be a winter to remember, but it had been utterly blind to the why. Maya met him in the garage, exhausted and pale. The models were finally catching up, she said, staring at a screen showing the Pacific's heat plume. "This isn't going to break for another 6 weeks. El Nino is peaking in February. We're in for a historic ice siege." Frank looked at his tattered copy of the Farmer's Almanac, which had warned of a frozen precipitation. He looked at the NOAA satellite imagery. He looked at Maya. "Here's the truth," Frank said, holding up both books. "The almanac knows the rhythm of the land, but the El Nino is changing the rhythm, and it's not just winter anymore. It's a climate puncher, and we're standing in the ring with our hands down." He tossed the outdated almanac into a pile of salt bags, and for the first time in his career, Frank wasn't preparing for a season. He was preparing for an era. The 2027 Super El Nino wasn't just a weather event, it was a punctuation mark at the end of the old world sentence. As the snow continued to fall, burying the dog-eared pages under a frozen tidal wave, Frank turned to the real-time radar. The forecast wasn't in a book anymore. It was in the chaos of the ocean. For the first time, he realized that the old farmers had never seen a beast like this. They couldn't have. The storm wasn't written in the stars. It was written in the warming seas, and Buffalo was just the first to read the warning.
Down below, I'ma pull you
Thank you
all
for
up,
tuning in.
but
The only way to
please
deal with
don't
the future is
let
to function
go.
as a creative force. Ursula K. Le Guin. Prophecy isn't passive, it's participation. Subscribe, comment, react. Thanks again for tuning
Our
in.
actions are written in blood, sweat, and tears. We can't lie, and you are not alone. Keep painting your sorrows in chords, songs, and poems. Music is medicine, a preventative cure. Don't give up on